Hi folks, I was just about to start sanding this 12-foot handrail that I'm going to use in an upcoming stair project. And that got me to thinking about different types of sandpaper I could use and some of the tools I could use to get the sanding job done. You notice there's a little bit of curve on here, so I have to think about that. And then I got to thinking, maybe doing a basic overview of some of the sandpaper and some of the tools that you can use to get different sanding projects done might be a good idea. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to just look at some of the basics of some of the sandpaper and some of the tools that you could use, ranging from simple sandpaper in your hand to some pretty neat power tools and everything in between. You might find one of these works for you. So stick around and let's learn together. Well, when we're talking about sandpaper, there's certainly a lot of choices available to us. As you can see here in front of me, there's a lot of different varieties, and this is just a small sampling of what's potentially available to you out there. But there is one thing in common when we're talking about sandpaper, and that's grit. Now, I'm not talking about good old American individualism and intestinal fortitude, at least not today. I'm talking about the abrasive that you're going to find on your sandpaper. That's how we tell how aggressive the sandpaper is going to be. So for example, this particular type of sandpaper, which is for a belt sander, is really rough, really hard to pull my fingers across. And this has a grit level associated with it. Now, the lower the number, the more aggressive it is. So this is an 80. They certainly come lower. You can get a 40 and below. And something like this, I can run my fingers through fairly easily. This is a 150, so this is a much finer piece of sandpaper, a finer aggregate that's on it or abrasive. And they're going to have their different purposes. Now, the rule of thumb is you're going to start with something more aggressive and you're going to end up with something much finer. Now, what numbers do you start with? Well, that's going to depend on several factors, such as the wood you're using, the condition of the wood, how much material you want to take off, and then when you get to the other end, the type of finish that you're going to put on it. It actually makes a difference. There are certain cases where you don't want to go too high in the grit number. Now, I'm not going to cover all the different types of grit level here today and what you might use on every single project, but I would like to hear from you. If you would, throw down in the comments the different types of grit level you like to use for different projects and for different finishes. That's how we'll all learn together. Now, as far as types of sandpaper go, there's some that aren't even sandpaper. So for example, this is just steel wool, but it has its place. When you're trying to get some nubbies off the final wood product that you're doing, sometimes you want to use something like that. These are little sanding blocks. They're simple little sponges with an abrasive on them. And these are good for doing some type of block sanding. And they have a little bit of give in case you have a little bit of profile you're working with. And of course, there's different grit levels associated with those also. This particular one is a pretty aggressive one, but it has a profile on it. So you can use it to get up into angles in different areas that you might be trying to sand. Pretty useful. Now this is a good old-fashioned sheet of sandpaper. You can cut off what you need or tear off what you need. You might take a little piece and do a little sanding, or you might cut off something that you're going to use in a block sander. Now this is a sheet that's already been pre-cut for you. It might cost a little bit more per piece, but they're already sized for a lot of your sanders. This type of thing typically you would put on your sander and hook up into the sides and you're ready to go. You don't have to worry about cutting it. It's already sized for you. It's pretty useful. We have things like this, which is a spindle sander that you're going to put on a device to do sanding. They basically have a little sleeve that you're going to put over the spindle. And again, the commonality on all these is you have various sizes of grit to each one. Something like this is something where you're going to roll it around a drum on a drum sander. We also have something like this, which is good for belt sanders. And they're different sizes depending on the device you're using, but they'll also be coated for various materials that you're going to be using on the belt sander. For example, this one's typically used for wood. This one here is actually good for metal if you want to use that, and you can sand metal. We have something like this, which is a cloth type sanding material. You can use this if you're rubbing it over something, or perhaps even on a some type of spindle that you're doing, or even a lathe. And then we have something like this. This is used for a orbiting sander, and they have different backings on these, but the one I like is basically the hook and latch type. It's basically a Velcro, and it's going to stick onto your device, and then you're going to use it on your sander. And we'll take a look at that when we look at the various hardware. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the devices we can use to help us with sanding. And we're going to start from the most basic, and then we're going to work our way up through some of the fancier tools, some of the power tools we can use. Wait, there is one thing I have to do that's been bugging me for a very long time. Give me just a minute. It's gone. The first tool we're going to talk about to help with sanding is pretty cheap. It's this. It's your hand. It actually does a pretty good job in certain situations. You can take that piece of sandpaper if you have just a small area, maybe some contours, and do that fine sanding that you want to do. Once you get beyond that, though, you're probably going to want to move up to something else to help you. Now, it doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to have fancy tools. For example, simple block of wood if you've got one laying around. You can take this and combine it with a sheet of sandpaper, fold it over, snug it up a little bit, and you got your little block sander, and you can just sand across. Sometimes you might have a special situation where maybe a dowel rod will help you. If you saw my build on putting in dog holes in my bench top, you'll see I did something like that. I took a dowel rod and wrapped the sandpaper around there and went inside the hole and just sanded it out inside. It worked fairly well. Also, if you have a profile, a concave area that you're trying to sand up against something, you can just put that over there and get up in there and sand it. And of course, different size dowel rods might meet your needs depending on the project you're doing. Now, a level above that, using just your hand, or for example, a block of wood would be something you purchase, like these sanding blocks here. These sanding blocks here are pretty inexpensive, and they allow you to use, like in this case, a sheet of paper that you just stick inside here, and it secures in, and then you can just sand with it. These are pretty neat blocks because they have the hook and loop or the Velcro style sandpaper that you can use with the rounded sheets, and they're made for that to where it fits right over it. Now this one has a profile to it and it's curved, so if I have a convex area and I'm sanding, you can get right in there and sand that. This one is a flat one, very similar to this block, but it's made for that rounded sandpaper. So you can take that sandpaper and hook it on there, and you're ready to go. These are pretty cool. The next thing I want to show you to assist with sanding comes in the forms of these little kits or these little blocks that you can get, and they're used in combination with a sheet of sandpaper. You can get different sizes and different shapes depending on what you're wanting to do. For example, this is a convex set of angles, which is simply different angles that you have, different sizes. And you take a sheet of sandpaper and you put over it, and you can hold it. You might want to cut this down if you need to. But basically form it to the angle, and now when you're trying to get up into that little area there and sand, you're going to hit right where you need. And then you have various contours. And this particular one is for concaves, to where you can wrap it around there and get that rounded area based on the angle that you're working with there. And the kit will often come with different sizes. Here's more of a convex with a rounded top. You can basically fit that in there, wrap it around. You can get up into that shape and sand like this. Quick and easy. These little kits like this really aren't that expensive, and when you're trying to do those odd areas where you're sanding, these can help a lot. Now we're going to start moving into the power tool categories. The first one we're going to look at is this one. It is an Orbital Sander. It is battery operated, so it can be cord free unless you have some type of dust extraction hooked up to it to capture the dust. You can usually use a bag with these, but the dust extraction is better. These are really good sanders. They will do an area fairly quickly as you move around and do your sanding. They come with the hook and latch type sandpaper we talked about. The main thing there is to make sure that you get the holes lined up with the pad, the holes in the pads, so that the dust extraction works well. If not, you'll get much more dust clogged up in there and on your surface, and that will actually go against your sanding efforts. So don't do that. Now, if we want to kick that up a notch, I do have this random orbital sander. Now, this is a Festool, which is a little bit Controversial to some because, yes, it is a very expensive tool. Not every woodworker is going to have something like this. You do not have to have something like this, but I can honestly say, after using this and using many other sanders over the years, this thing produces very little vibration, and when it's hooked up with their dust extraction system, it produces very little dust. I'm sure there's other things you can get that can do something equivalent to this, but this is the first one I ran across and used that I said, I really like this sander. Again, do not have to have this sander. If you're going to do a whole lot of sanding, though, in an environment where you're worried about the vibration and the dust, it's something at some point you might want to consider. I'd recommend doing like I did, which is I went to my local woodcraft and I took a small class once, and I used one there for the first time, and I said, I like this thing. That's how I got hooked on it. But again, do not have to have it, and other things will work just fine for your needs. There's one thing I should have said about the random orbit nature of this, and again, that's not specific to Festool. That is something you can get in many brands, the random orbit feature. In addition to the head spinning on this, it will also orbit and basically has a pattern that it will go around. It's called a random orbital, but basically it moves around like this as it's spinning. And what that's going to get you is a much finer finish. So when you get up in those higher ranges of sandpaper and you're trying to get that final finish, something like this can put that finishing touch on what you're trying to do. So the next hand sander that I want to show you, it's actually a two-hander sander, and that's this. This is a belt sander. This is to hog a lot of material off in a short period of time. Not going to use it for much fine woodworking, but if you've got an area where you're trying to take a lot of wood down, maybe a big slab, you do have to be careful with these because they take so much material off. It's often hard to get your material level all the way across. You have to be very careful of what you're taking off. But this thing will do the job. There are accessories you can get with some of your sanders. So for example, this pad right here is a really soft pad, and it goes on this harder plate right here. And when you put that on, again, lining the holes up properly, you now have a soft surface that your sandpaper is going to go on. Again, on these, you just have to make sure you line all the holes up. Okay, and when you have something like that, that can be good when you want to make sure you follow profiles of something, because it will follow along with you. So let's say you're trying to sand something that's rounded. You can go like this. Without something like this, it's a lot easier to leave flat spots on something you don't want flat. You want rounded. So just be aware when you're using your sander, you may have options like this. So take a look around. So the next category we're going to look at are your benchtop or your stand mounted devices. Something like this kind of takes the place of this. It's a belt sander, but it's bench mounted, and it's fairly easy to put a piece up here and push it up against and sand and get a nice even finish. So these are pretty useful. This also has the option to pull this off and it becomes a spindle sander. You install these different size spindles that you can get, and then you can get those nice rounded areas when you're trying to do sanding. These do quick and efficient work. Again, like anything, especially power tools, you have to be careful you don't take off too much material, but they're very useful. You can pick up something like this fairly cheap. Harbor Freight sells them along with many other places, different varieties, so shop around. I will put links to some of the things that we've looked at here in my webpage, and there'll be affiliate links like usual, but like I always say, shop around and get the best value and the right tool for you. The last sanding tool that I'll talk about is very expensive, and not everybody needs one. If you can afford one and it meets your needs, they are a great thing to have, though, especially if you do a lot of things like cutting boards. And that's a drum sander. The drum sander can do a lot of linear feet of material in a short period of time. Changing the sandpaper on them is fairly easy to get your different grits. They come in various widths so that you can do small projects or you can do wider projects, depending on your budget and what it is you think you'll be sanding. I will mention that as nice as they are, they're usually not your final sanding solution, though, because even if you do a cutting board, the nature of the drum and how it spins with the sandpaper usually is going to leave, even if it's very fine, small grooves that run along the surfacing material. So usually after you get it down to about where you want it, you're going to hit it a little bit with something like this, the random orbital sander, to finish that off and get rid of those grooves that you might have in there. But it's a very powerful tool. Again, not something everybody needs. Well, I hope you've gotten something out of this and that people will leave comments about the different types of grits and sandpaper they use for their various projects and the different finishes, and that we'll learn from each other. Right now, I've got to get back to work on that handrail. Perhaps I'll see you for that video coming up. Thanks for watching.